In the recent war film Fury, a broken-down US Sherman tank holds a vital crossroads in Germany in 1945 against a battalion of advancing SS, fighting them off for some time before finally being overwhelmed. The story of Fury seems on the surface to be fictional, even unrealistic. In a real battle in 1945, a disabled Sherman would have been quickly finished off by German Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets. But putting that aside, you may be surprised to learn that a tank did indeed hold back a German advance single-handedly, but unlike in Fury, most of the crew survived. The tank in question wasn't American, but British, and the fight wasn't in the Second World War, but the First. This is the story of Fray Bentos, the tank that held up the German army for 60 hours during the horrific Battle of Passchendaele in August 1917. The tank in question, F-41, was a male Mark IV with a crew of 9 men. It was the infancy of tank warfare, but these early iron behemoths had already made a big impression on the battlefield. The Mark IV tank had been introduced earlier in 1917, improving on earlier models of British tanks. 420 male versions were built. Males carried both cannons and machine guns, while the female version was only armed with 6 Lewis machine guns. The vehicle weighed 28 tons and had armour a quarter to half an inch thick, or 6 to 12 millimeters. They had first been used on the 7th of June 1917, the Battle of Missen's Ridge. The terrain, though heavily cratered by artillery, was dry and the tanks performed well. At this time, tanks were most vulnerable to German artillery fire. Tank F-41 was commanded by Captain Don Richardson. He'd named the tank Fray Bentos after the famous corned beef manufacturer, the canned meat being sold in his family grocery shop in Nottingham. Fray Bentos had a top speed of 4 miles per hour, but being a male tank packed a heavy punch with 2 ordnance, quick-firing 6-pounder guns and 3 Lewis machine guns. Fray Bentos was one of several British tanks that took part in an attack supporting the 61st Infantry Division on the 22nd of August 1917 in an assault near the village of Saint-Julien, 4 miles northeast of Ypres in Belgium. For 3 weeks the battlefield had been bombarded by artillery and heavy rain, turning it into a sea of mud. Fray Bentos ground into action with Captain Richardson actually walking beside the tank to help guide the driver. As the tank advanced, it knocked out a German machine gun nest, but ran into more Maxim gunfire. Richardson being wounded in the leg, he quickly got back inside his tank. Under intense fire, Fray Bentos' driver, Lieutenant George Hill, was wounded in the neck and the tank slid into a ditch, out of control. In order to get the tank out of the ditch, special unditching beams were strapped to the roof. Sergeant Robert Missen and Lance Corporal Breedy clambered out, but the German fire was intense. Missen ducked back inside, but Breedy was killed. The rest of the crew fired back with machine guns and rifles. The British infantry attack was beaten back and they retired back to their own lines, leaving Fray Bentos alone in no man's land. German infantry counterattacked to regain their lost positions, Fray Bentos actually resting partly on top of a German trench. German infantry moved up and attempted to swarm the tank, trying to get stick grenades inside. The trapped British soldiers fought madly, shooting down dozens. One grenade was actually inserted inside the tank, but thrown back before it detonated. By now, most of Fray Bentos' crew were wounded. The immobilized Fray Bentos acted like a big iron bunker in the middle of the German lines, a little salient that the Germans desperately tried to pinch out, but which cost them heavy casualties against Richardson's stubborn band of heavily outnumbered men. And so it went on for 3 days and 2 nights, the crew of Fray Bentos beating off attack after attack by German troops, as they gradually ran out of water, food and ammunition, even resorting to drinking water from the radiators, the engines. After 60 hours trapped inside the ruined tank, Captain Richardson decided that they must save themselves. Once darkness fell on the 24th of August, the survivors left one by one, crawling through the thick mud and over the corpses of dead Germans and British, until, bloody and exhausted, they reached the Ford British Trench and were saved. Richardson received the Military Cross, as well as Lieutenant Hill. Sergeant Missen and one of the gunners received the Distinguished Conduct Medal, while all of the rest of the crew were awarded the Military Medal for their outstanding bravery. The crew of Fray Bentos were the most highly decorated tank crew of the war. The tank itself was abandoned on the battlefield and scrapped shortly after the war ended in 1918. Captain Richardson went on to command another tank, interestingly named Fray Bentos II, for the duration of the war. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also support my channel at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box.